Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schmidtless Live. I am your host, Kurt Schmidt, president and partner at Foundry, and I am very excited for today's show. I'm not excited for the audio issues that I seem to be having, but we'll see if you might see me tinkering around a little bit during the live show, so I apologize for that. But speaking of tinkering, I do have to mention that we are hiring at Foundry, so check it out, foundrymakes.com/careers. We are hiring. Tell your friends, tell two friends. Tell everybody, share it, go up, scream it to everybody, let them know. I'm really excited for my guest today, Sarah Kim. We got introduced a while back, and she is an amazing expert on all things when it comes to how to, let's just say, how to work with as a leader, especially a technology leader in the workplace, because things have changed. I don't know if you've noticed, but they have. And, it used to be where, the cultural differences and time zone differences and all these things didn't really much matter. But now that the world is so connected, we're global, we're interacting with multiple different cultures, multiple time zones, people are in different places, social, economic, political environments. Having an understanding of what motivates you is more important than ever before. So we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to bring in Sarah here. Let's see. Bring her in, add her in. There she is. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Hey, Kurt. I'm doing good.
Good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
So tell me a little bit about Sarah. How did you get involved in technology? Were you growing up and saying, "Oh, I can't wait to make the internet bigger and program all the things in the world" when you were young, or did you trip and fall into it like most of us did?
Oh, yeah, it was kind of a trip and fall, but I think it was a calculated trip and fall. I actually went to business school, so I didn't go to technology school, engineering.
Me too. Obviously, you could tell.
Yeah.
I started. No, I'm kidding. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So back in business school, I actually specialized in organizational behavior, HR consulting, that sort of thing.
Okay.
But I had a range of corporate experience cutting across marketing, executive search, government, and technology industries back in Singapore, and that's where I'm from. So prior to moving to the US, I was actually a government program manager. And I worked with a lot of startups, small, medium businesses, and large corporations. And the kind of work we were doing were in the area of innovation partnerships. There was some levels of business transformation, lots of co-innovation, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And there was a lot of technology involved in it. But I always was fascinated with how much there was to it, but I didn't know enough. So when it came time for me to join my husband in the US, I decided, okay, let's perhaps make that move and take that leap into technology. So I taught myself how to code. And when I actually moved to the US in 2015, it was really a strategic decision to get into technology. And at that time, I think I owe it to my husband for pushing me and believing in me, to really keep me accountable to those commitments that I made. Because coming into technology
Yep.
is not easy. But currently, I am a technology leader. At a Fortune 500 company here in the US, and I do lead software engineering teams. So,
Very cool. And so as you've grown in your, I can speak from my personal experience, but growing in leadership, what were some of the initial challenges or things that you realized as you were gaining influence and as you were gaining more responsibility? One thing I've talked about a lot on this show is that work is so much different than it used to be because, 20, 30 years ago, whoever was your manager was your boss, was your HR person. And these days you've got project managers, you've got product managers, you've got all these people sort of in between that are managing work, but the team, they can't fire the team, they can't replace people necessarily. So I feel like that has made leadership have to shift, especially in that mid-management level where you have to, you can't just go in and tell people what to do anymore. So did you see those challenges as you were growing?
Yes, in fact, being in Singapore and managing there, I realized that it's quite different
Okay.
from management in the US. I think there are some cultural differences. In Singapore, at least at that time, it was still quite traditional.
Yep.
You could tell people what to do and they would just listen.
They
But
just do it.
it doesn't work that way here. In fact,
No.
when you
Nope.
do the same thing here, that's just not how people operate. And
Yeah.
and the other thing is, coming into technology now, more companies have started to look into this concept of agile. And with the concept of agile comes self-organizing teams. And you can't use old styles of management and leadership to try to manage, or in some ways micromanage a self-organizing team.
Hmm.
You just destroy the progress that the team has already made. So getting to understand that, and also making the transition from the mindset of management to the mindset of being a leader. I think that's a very common transition that many leaders will have to go through as they grow as a
Yeah.
leader over time. And I think the other thing is also understanding the trends, right, in technology. In the past, I think, traditionally speaking, technology teams played more of like an ops support role. And so you could do that in silos. But then today, we're seeing technology teams, they've started to evolve to become more of I don't know where I read this, but they call it like a team sport now. So it's
Yeah.
more collaborative, and it's also more of a strategic function now. A lot of companies, when we talk about digital transformations, right?
Yep.
More
Yep.
companies have put technology front and center, and it's part of their strategic imperative now. And so with that comes a lot more responsibility now for technology leaders to start to look at their role more as a leader of teams. And I guess there's now a need to figure out how you bring people together, how you get them to collaborate. And traditionally, the technologists aren't, that well versed with that.
No.
You're not born with that.
No.
These are things like no one's born a leader, right? So
Nope.
you have to build those skill sets, I think, which I think ties quite well into today's topic.
Yeah, because you and I, when we first really talk, you talk about the idea, the concept of left brain, right brain, and how, to be a great programmer and an efficient programmer and these things, you're very logical. Things are very either on or off, right? There's not a lot of gray area. And then all of a sudden you have to deal with people. And they don't work the same way as it does when you're coding things. They don't respond the same way. And yeah, to your point, what I've seen in many organizations where, as they're building these teams, they're thinking, well, Sarah's the best developer we have, so we'll just put her in charge of the development team. But not give her any support or any management training or anything like that. But you just go because you'll get the most out of them because you're the best developer. Have you seen that sort of thing?
I've seen it. I hope I'm not one of them, but I've seen that happen. In fact, I think for engineers in general, right? Our comfort zone as engineers is really being head down in the problem space. So
Yeah.
we have a complex problem that's exciting to us.
Yep.
I want to be deciphering data. Maybe I want to be coding. As a software engineer,
Yep.
I want to be coding. But what really happens is, especially now we're talking about it more like a team sport, the need for collaboration and the need for this idea of collaborative innovation. It's no longer about siloed innovation and then we just glorify that one innovative idea and then bring it up
Right.
and say everyone follow it. It's not like that anymore. So at some point you have to communicate your idea. So not even looking into leadership, just as an engineer, you can have a fantastic idea, right? You
Yep.
create a proof of concept. Now you bring it to the just random people around you, and then they tell you it's cool. Your
Yep.
leader also tells you it's cool, right?
Yep.
And then at some point, you have to get to the space of implementation and execution. Then you get a tremendous amount of resistance. And you just don't understand why people seem to hate your idea now. They told you it was cool, right?
Yep.
But at that point, you end up in this really frustrated situation. And I think that's where this concept of understanding yourself, understanding people comes in. And this is where I think usually there's a huge gap between I have I have this capability, this technical skill set, and then now you're asking me to feel, like get in touch with people's emotions. And that's so fluffy.
What a waste of time.
You know? Yeah. So I think it's really understanding, like, okay, how do I get myself out of the code for a second? And how am I supposed to be sharing these ideas with people? So I think the idea is really making that, I don't know if it's a paradigm shift or it's just a mindset shift, that you don't want to be in silos all the while. Imagine if you were discovering, before you even do your proof of concept, you're discovering and you're actually bringing people who you believe in the end would have to implement the idea with you. If you bring them in a bit earlier and then you get their ideas, hear from them, and then you evolve and refine your own idea. That way, when it comes to the time where you're getting them on board, they're more easily bought in to that idea. So I think that piece is where, how you're going to communicate, how you're going to regulate that partnership, how you're going to bring things into your zone of control. I don't know. That's just, to me,
Yep.
it's more liberating versus telling people, hey, just understand what the other person's feeling and, read the body language. It's just, I think it's too far of a gap for someone who's a little bit more left brain to understand, I think.
Yeah, the thing that they don't teach you in that leadership thing is that, as you get installed as that leader, you start to focus on the team. Okay, well, how can I make the team more efficient? How can I support the team? How can I do all these team? And the first thing you should be thinking about is, how am I working on myself? How am I understanding what drives me? What are my triggers? What are the things that piss me off? What are the things that make me super excited? I think that's one big misstep that people make when they first get their leadership role, is not understanding what's their motivations, what's driving them. Because if they don't have a clear idea of those things, it's hard to rally a team around your ideas and thoughts, right?
It's true. And I think that idea of being aware of yourself also comes into play when I think you just need to understand that you create your own perceptions and emotions. And so it's how you see things, how you assess yourself, how you understand what your drivers are, again, it might, if you start talking about examples to this, it might sound fluffy. You might be asking people to start to have a little bit of mindfulness, self-reflection, and maybe you journal or something. But, I always feel like taking some time to reflect is very important, because you're reflecting on not just what other people say to you or your own actions in the day, but you're also making the connections. That's so key when you're collaborating with other people. That time to make the connections that nobody's going to show you or direct you on, I think that's super key. And when you go up into, as you move up in leadership, I believe that's where, thinking about what you need to do to become a better leader, that is actually something that you need to think about. You want to go far, you look within.
Yeah, because you get to your point. Hopefully you've got good leaders to mimic already in your organization, or to mentor you, or you've had good leaders in the past. I've talked about it before. Like I probably learned more from the bad bosses I've had, more what not to do. But let's say Sarah, you're giving some advice right now to a person working in technology, and they're going to be taking over a team. They're going to be leading a team. What sort of things, should they be doing to do that self-reflection? What things have worked for you? And then how do you start to build trust with that team?
I think the first thing you do when you take over a new team is do nothing In fact, I just took over a new team right now, and I'm doing my best not to do anything.
Mm,
I think it's important for us to observe
mm,
how things are going, especially if the team has been in existence for a while before you even came about, you know. It's so important to first understand how what works for them. It's not like they won't survive without you, especially if you're taking over an existing team. So you need to understand what works for them. And then I think it's also really important, if you do have to get involved in it, it's more like what would make them work best.
yeah.
So if there is a need for you to create some kind of alignment, because you're the leader after all, if it's an alignment toward the organization goals, by all means, if you need involved in that early, that's fine. But I think in the beginning part, you know, starting out leading a team that's already in existence, it's really observing them,
Sure.
and then ensuring that once you have some level of some kind of idea, you know, maybe you take a month or so, or for depending on how large your team is, maybe you take 3 months. I don't know how long, but you observe for some time, and then with that, with all the knowledge you got, maybe there are some gaps. You don't just tell people about the gaps, but I always feel like it's important to have maybe one-on-ones with each of the individuals on your team, and form partnerships with them. Even though you might be their leader, you can still partner with each of them. You know, partner with them for the organization, partner with them for their career growth,
Yep.
partner with them for, you know, what y'all's joint goals are. It's important to establish that, and then from there you can establish some levels of understanding on expectations. And every time I have an agreement with somebody on what the expectations are, you you follow up with that. And that level of follow up, that level of trust that's being built, is from all these small gestures and interactions. I think that helps you build trust. The other thing
Mm-hmm.
is, when they need you, you have to be there.
Yep.
And so oftentimes you don't want to coach somebody when they don't need it. Like if you
Yep.
saw a gap, and that maybe you saw the gap like a week ago, right? But you're still new. You don't want to just jump in and say, "Hey, I see this gap. This is what you need to do." Like, who are you? Like, how do you know? Right? You need time to observe and see how they work.
Yep.
So, but when it comes the time where, you know, they really need help, then you come in, and it's not like you're a hero or anything. You come in and you ask questions. I
Yep.
always feel like I ask questions. I ask them the questions, and to me, that's what servant leader is. You ask the questions to lead them to the answer, and they feel the satisfaction of getting to the answer themselves. So when they actually achieve something, they go like, "Oh my gosh, I did this." Not
Yep.
Kurt helped me or Sarah helped me, and so I got there. I mean, some
Yep.
people they have the self awareness to know like, oh, my leader actually helped me get to that answer. But oftentimes you want to see them actually have that satisfaction themselves. I think that helps build the trust too. Um, it's all part and parcel of this idea, I think, of having empathy for other people, having the social skills to be able to, you know, bring them from not knowing to knowing.
Yep.
um, I, I think it's all part and parcel of this whole topic.
Yeah, I love what you said, you know, because it's one thing I've seen, and I've been, you know, guilty of this early on in my career, where you go into a one-on-one and you're like, so what do you want to talk about? And they're like, I don't know. And they talk about their work and, you know, project they're on or something. And then you're done and you're kind of like, oh, I feel unfulfilled, and they feel unfulfilled. And you kind of walk away. I think to your point, you know, you have to be very intentional in those one-on-ones about what you're looking for. And you know, even though the one-on-one should be that person's time, you know, it should be their time, not your time to just as a leader to sit and talk at them. You know, a lot of people have not had good one-on-one experiences in their career, and so you know, they're kind of, you know, at least in those first one-on-ones, they're kind of testing the waters to be like, what's this going to be like? Am I going to get any value out of this? I've never gotten value out of one-on-ones before. I don't like one-on-ones. I don't want to do one-on-ones. I think one-on-ones are dumb. And that's because you know, you've had leaders before that didn't know how to do them properly to create value for that person. And to your point, the value isn't going to be the same for everybody. So you can't have just a script that you go through. But I think going in and intentionally coming in with questions and getting them to talk about the things that, how the work is impacting them, what their goals are, and those sorts of things. I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with engineers and been like, what are some of your goals? And they're like, I don't know, work less, get paid more. It's like, okay.
They're being real. They're being
Yep.
real. But,
Yep.
but oftentimes what I like to do is I want us to graduate from talking about status updates, because that's the
Yeah.
usual.
Right.
They and for everybody is different. Some team members would take a longer time to get from a point of status updates to talking about maybe it's their careers or their thoughts or some ideas that they have. But I really want to graduate people to start thinking about just, sometimes it's unfiltered thoughts, but it does take time to build that psychological safety and that trust that they're willing to share those things with you. Personally, I feel that's where the value is in one-on-ones, because I want to hear the unfiltered thoughts. I know it's kind of difficult to ask, individual contributors to do that. But if you create enough trust, they will be a little bit more open to share their ideas with you. And it's really important for leaders to be able to see how or experience how their people think.
Yep.
And once I know how they think, then I can help guide that thought process toward, more refined ideas, which then when they collaborate with each other, that's where innovation comes about. And
Yep.
I think that's where the value is as a leader when you're leading your the one-on-ones. And I say leading, I don't mean you're owning the one-on-one. Ultimately, you want your individual contributor, your team member to own that one-on-one.
Yeah. And back to what you were saying about psychological safety. I just did a show about that, and in those one-on-ones, if you want people to feel like it's okay to share things that they might be nervous sharing with their leader, starting off with being vulnerable yourself will be helpful to create those conversations. Showing vulnerability on your side will create a safer space for them to feel like, oh, it's okay for me to share, that I don't like working with Jennifer over here because she's terrible, or I don't like this project, or these types of things. Now, obviously you got to make sure, it doesn't become an unproductive venting session, but venting is important. I think venting is positive. But usually what I just make sure that I'm very clear, like, do you expect me to do any action on this? Or are you just venting? Do I have a takeaway? Do I have a new project now because you're venting about this thing? Or are you just blowing off some steam? And I can certainly be a good listener and listen to your frustrations. And then so I've said this before on multiple occasions. You've got to identify what kind of conversation you're having. Is this one where we are just venting, some blowing off some steam, or are we actually trying to solve a problem? Because I think there's two different ways to do that. Venting, I've seen more immature leaders take that as, oh, that's an action item, I need to go and chase that down. When to that person it was just important in the moment. Like later they're fine, they don't really care. But you're like, I'm the leader, I charge. I'll go and solve this problem. I think making sure that you have a good balance between what you understand what the word support means for people, right? And I think you mentioned it earlier, not just solving the problem for them, but helping them get to a place where they're solving their own problems, right?
Exactly. So oftentimes I see as, it's important as a leader to understand the pulse of the team, right? Or the teams that you're leading. And there are a few things that I would usually look out for. How often things get escalated to me. And It could be in form of a venting, but it's how often these things get escalated. If you're getting a lot of it, and sometimes you're realizing that there's a trend, some of these things that are being escalated to you, maybe they could handle it on their own. Then at that point, it's probably, bringing it up to them that, hey, I having the empathy, understanding where they're coming from, giving them the space, and then leading them to understand that some of these things actually they can control.
Yep.
They have a lot. Honestly, when you take ownership on some of these areas, you find that you have a lot more control over the scenarios that you're a part of than you think. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, well, especially in what you talked about, those self-organizing teams. Like, I wouldn't put you in a self-organizing team if I wanted you to bring every problem you run into to my doorstep. You can't have it both ways, where you want more control over your destiny and your work, but you also don't want to take the responsibility and you don't want to be accountable for those decisions. And I think that's where it's a maturity thing, right? Is that just you said, like, I give anybody as much agency as they want, as long as they assume the accountability for the decisions that they make, and that if they make more problems, they will solve those problems, and I don't have to worry about it. But for people who say, well, I want more responsibility, and then they go out and do these things, and then they come back and complain that people aren't doing what they said, or the software isn't working how they thought it would, I'm like, well, you've done this to yourself. I don't I don't know what else to tell you. You asked for this and you got it. Oh, look, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions, look at them. They just shown up, and so I think, again, going back to, if you understand who you are as a leader and you understand your triggers and your things, you can identify that stuff very quickly, and instead of reacting from a purely emotional state, you can kind of step back and be the observer of, like, how is this conversation going? How could it go better? Stepping outside of yourself, right? Because I always joke that, like, emotional intelligence is just another way of saying get over yourself.
Actually, I think it is. It really is. But we have to understand, right? Like, there's the two levels to it. First is self, and it always starts with self, and then it's others, right? So for self is, like you said, understanding self and then managing self, and then with others is more like how you use the knowledge of yourself to interact with other people. So what comes into play is your style of communication and how it plays out, right? So when we're looking at the team, and I like to use this, I go back to the pulse again, because it's so important for us to understand the pulse around us. And with that, then we'll have scenarios, and then we can think about how best to lead or how best to respond, right? Not react in different scenarios. So if I'm seeing things like people not accepting criticism very well.
Sure.
So the first thing I'm going to do is try to understand, like, am I creating a certain kind of environment where people can't accept the criticism and they have to defend themselves, right? So it's the first thing I'm going to ask myself is, how am I contributing to this so-called issue? And then, of course, you ask more questions about that, and then at some point you go, like, okay, maybe there is a portion that this other person is contributing to it, and that's where you bring them in and have a conversation, right? So that's another example of when I tend to see, okay, pulse-wise, maybe I need to do some work with the team. I need to partner with a specific team member a little bit more. Another one is maybe they don't own up to their mistakes. That's another classic case. Like, ownership is so important in teams, in high-performing teams. If they're not owning up to a mistake, like, it's just a mistake. Am I creating an environment where it's not okay to experiment? It's not okay to fail, So that's first thing I'm going to do. And then next thing, it will be, why is it that they are not owning up? Is it because they are afraid that by owning up, they're seen as less? Or or is this something else, right? So it's
Yep.
understanding them and then working with them to own up to it, and then maybe even creating some kind of plan where
Yeah.
it's not bad at all. We have a way around it, or we have a way to address it. Other things are like, this one's I don't know if you've seen this in your engineering teams, but sarcasm.
Yep.
It's another one where, if I see a lot of sarcasm going on, I'm like, are we being real with each other, or are we just joking
Right.
around?
Right.
If
Is
some
this just
level
all
of
passive
sarcasm
aggressive?
yeah, some level of sarcasm is okay, but if
Oh,
it's
sure. Yeah.
an excessive amount, it's a telltale sign for me that perhaps we need to do something about it. The other one is lack of delegation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big one.
If they're taking all the work to themselves, I mean, some people just believe that it's
Yep.
easier for them to do it on their own, but that's not
Yep.
beneficial to the organization.
Yeah.
So I like to look at it from that direction when
Mm-hmm.
I see this topic of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, one big piece of advice, I mean, because language matters when you're having those conversations and how you're doing that. So one thing that I learned early on was, instead of, when you talked about criticism, for example, and what I've seen people make the mistake is go in and say, I feel like you're doing this, or I feel like you're doing that. Like, I feel like, you're not doing this thing. Now, that's accusatory in its nature, and it's a really simple twist to turn it around and just again put it back on yourself and saying, I want to feel like is a bigger choice. So I want to feel like you can accept criticism from me. Not I feel like you don't accept criticism from me. That's accusatory. But if I say I want to feel like it's okay that you can accept any constructive criticism I have, it really starts to bring that person halfway across the table right away. And so language matters. Words matter, as my friend Leilani loves to say. Words do matter. And so I think back to your point about making sure you really understand how you're communicating, it's really important. One thing I used to do is I would again, I'm a masochist in some ways. Like, I would record myself in meetings and then listen back to it later to be like, it was a cringe fest. It was the worst thing, I hate that. But it did show me pockets and areas where maybe I interrupted somebody a little bit too much, or didn't let somebody finish something, or didn't jump in when I should have jumped in to stop a conversation from going on that did not need to keep going on. So, back to your point, there's self-reflection, and then there's sometimes where you've got to be extreme about it, So.
Yeah, it's true.
Yep. Yep. Because
Yeah.
again, it all depends on how quickly do you want to get to that level. There's lots of ways you can do it. You can read lots of books that'll give you lots of theories, but I definitely suggest finding other leaders in your organization if you can, or even outside the organization, and networking with them and asking them, what have you done in these situations, or how have you worked in these situations? That's why I think people enjoy podcasts so much, because just like we're having a real conversation about what it's like to be in that situation. And I think you learn a lot more from other people's experiences than you do just from, just reading books or going to, getting a certification in something.
Definitely, I do agree to that. In fact, there are also different ways to look at this, right? I might see things in ways where I resonate with stories, but there might be some left brain leaders out there that don't really resonate with the kind of stories that I tell. They might actually see things in logic. It has to follow a logical sequence, and
Yeah.
oftentimes
Yeah.
they're the ones that have challenges when people tell them, it's what is that, the difference between the golden rule and the platinum rule. So I think the golden rule is do unto others what
Right.
you want have done them to do to you.
Yep.
And then the platinum rules, treat others the way that they want to be treated. And so you tell that to a left brain leader, they'll be like, what do you mean? Like, okay, if I'm following the golden rule, that's perfect. I'll just treat people like how I treat people. But now we're saying you have to follow the platinum rule, and the platinum rule is how they want to be treated. What do you mean? So sometimes people tell them, don't look at it as human beings being creatures of logic, because they aren't like you, right? They're more creatures of emotion. But for a left brain leader, that might not connect. They literally need to see a comprehensive view of what all needs to be considered if they're trying to change something. And in leadership, you're constantly dealing with change. And that is why, Kurt, I had shared with you, Andrew, my husband, he wrote that book, Culture for the Left Brain Leader. It's really about how to deal with change, how to deal with transformation. What all do you have to consider in a way that's logically placed?
Yep.
And so you don't have to, you don't have to try to figure out what this person, how do they feel and things like that. Because, oftentimes when you get leadership advice, they're saying, care for your people, but tell that to a left brain leader. What do you mean care? I care for them, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yes, exactly.
Right. But they care in a different way. So giving that kind of advice to a left brain leader might not connect. And that's why, oftentimes as leaders, we need to understand different people operate differently. You might have somebody that requires a little bit more like a directive. This is the goal. This is what we're going to be doing. Doesn't matter how we're going to do it, but we're going to get there. This is it. You're going to have other people who are a little bit more on the let's get things going. The more influential people. Let's get it going. This is how we're going to do it, and we're going to do it. You also got the people who are a little bit more analytical, your left brain leaders that want to get it right, and so you have to give them a comprehensive view. This is all what you need to consider. And so you got this book here, right? And so you read this and then tell me what you think from that. So maybe, for left brain leaders, they need something like that. And then you also have your steady people on your team or other leaders. They just want everyone to get along. And so you need to be able to flex, I guess, your leadership style and have the emotional intelligence to be able to address each kind of individual in different ways.
Yeah, I love it. So yeah, speaking of the book, I'll have a link in the show notes so people can check that out as well. Thank you so much, Sarah, for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. If I want to connect with you, where's a good place to find you, Sarah Kim?
Oh, definitely. I would love to connect with anyone who's interested in topics like this. You can find me on LinkedIn, Sarah, SARAHYW, Kim, KIM. Or you can drop me an email, Sarah, SARAH, at cultureandstrategy.com. Sarah at cultureandstrategy.com.
Cultureandstrategy.com. Thank you so much for taking the time, Sarah. I really appreciate your perspective, and thank you for sharing it with the audience. I look forward to our next conversation.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right, everyone. So just like I had mentioned before, we are hiring. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Sarah. She's fantastic. And if you want to connect with her, go and check out Culture in Strategy. I'll have links in the show notes here a little bit later. And if you like this, make sure you're subscribed and the likes and the smashing of the buttons and I don't know what else the kids say these days. Have a great rest of your week.